So many desires, or as many desires, so many blankets. Covering the radiance of the Spirit. We have to uncover to discover. We have to uncover, discover. We have to uncover, discover.
Welcome, everyone, to a Divine Discoveries podcast. We're glad to be back, actually, with the entire group. Vikram is with us, and so is our in and out co-host, Christiane. And today we have a very interesting topic to speak about, the study of the Holy Scriptures, as of the Jewish faith as well as the Sanatana Dharma faith. So, but before we do that, as always, we will start with our prayers. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sadguru Bhagavan Ki Jai. Om Gajananam Bhuta Ganadi Sevitam Kapitta Jambhu Falasara Bakshitam Umasutam Shoka Vinash Karanam Namami Vigneshwara Pada Pankajam Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Sarvamangala Mangalye Shive Sarvartha Sadike Sharanye Triambake Devi Narayani Namostute. Om Dum Durgaye Namaha. Om Aim Saraswati Swaha. Om Shri Mahalakshmi Namaha. Om Shri Mahakalikaye Namaha. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandim Pushtivardhanam Urvarkamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mokshiyamamritat. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha. Om Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaha Prachodayat. Om Shantakaram Bhujagasayanam Padmanabham Suresham Vishwadharam Gaganasadursham Meghavarnam Shubhangam Lakshmi Kantam Kamlanayanam Yogi Birthyanagammyam Vande Vishnum Bhavabhayaharam Sarvalokaikanatham. Om Namo Narayanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Pandurangaya. Om Apadamapahartaram Dataram Sarvasampadam Lokabhiramam Shri Ramam Bhuyo Bhuyo Namamyaham. Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama. Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama. Shri Rama Jai Rama Jai Jai Rama. Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanurmardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Shri Krishnam Vande Jagatgurum. Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha. Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha. Om Klim Krishnaya Namaha. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Christiane, please tell people how they can connect with us.
Absolutely. On social media, we're on Facebook, and it's simply Divine Discoveries. We're on Instagram, which is divine_discoveries_108. We have a WhatsApp channel. If you search for Divine Discoveries, you can find us. We also have a dedicated email address, divinediscoveries108@gmail.com. So thank you to everyone who's reached out, and please continue reaching out with comments, questions, feedback, etc. It's really important to us, so we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So as I said in the beginning, we often, probably in almost every episode we've done, we've referenced where we're getting our wisdom from, and the topics that we've spoken about have largely tied into the Holy Scriptures of the faiths that we follow. And, we want to bring those scriptures to light so that people understand, the origins of these scriptures. Were they ever written by somebody? Was there an author? How old are they? There's so many of them when it comes to Sanatana Dharma. People have heard of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, Upanishads. There's so many that we hear the names of, but we don't quite understand maybe how they're classified or how to actually go about understanding which one has more authority than the other. There's so many questions that are tied into this. So we want to explore that through this episode and it sort of give everybody somewhat of a 101 introduction to the best of our ability that we understand it. It's very complex stuff, so trying to present that information to all of you the best we can. Hopefully, you all feel like you gain some better perspective from this discussion. But before we actually get into this topic, I'd like to actually open up the floor to both castmates and ask them, what do you guys think? Why do you guys think the scriptures, the Holy Scriptures, are worth studying, and what is their significance in our life? Why do you feel like the scriptures are important for us to know about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's important to study the scriptures because they lay out the foundation of faith. They lay out the foundation of how one can lead a path of righteousness, how one can lead a life of goodness, how one can gain knowledge and use that knowledge to get closer to the divine. So I think understanding that foundation is critical to continuing to grow one's devotion and understanding of their life's path. So I think that in that respect, understanding the scriptures and studying them is critical. Though it must also be noted, and as I think our listeners will find during the course of this episode, it's not always the simplest to decode everything, but that's also because the universe that we are in and the teachings that are there are endless, boundless, and we only have scratched the surface with whatever we know. So I think that's really what I feel is the essence of the scriptures.
I agree. I think there's a user's manual type of a feeling here, because whenever we buy a new product and we're just trying to figure out how to use it, that manual in the form of the scriptures in this context is important for us to kind of help us figure out what path we're on and what path we'd like to be on, and how to go about progressing, on that path. So, yeah, Christiane?
Yeah, absolutely. You said user's manual. We call our Torah, it literally means teachings. And, we have thousands of years of written and oral teachings. So we don't need to start from scratch here. We already have it, just as you have in your tradition, thousands and thousands of years. So we can look to that from an academic perspective, from a historical perspective, and they're incredible tools and blueprints for us that can guide us. So I think it's kind of a starting point, if you will, for our own spiritual launchings.
Absolutely. So, Christiane, since you, kind of touched on your Holy Scriptures, I believe it's called the Torah, is that right? Can you
Yes.
tell us more details about that scripture and its origins and,
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So the Torah, so basically we have a Hebrew Bible, if you will, and the Torah is really the most significant piece of this. And it's really also known as the 5 books of Moses. So Moses was our great leader who led us out of slavery. The 5 books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And in these books, we have the creation story and the beginnings of Jewish history under the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We learn of our history as slaves in Egypt and our rescue by God from this slavery. I know I talked about this in an earlier episode when I was speaking about the Passover. It's believed in our faith that we receive the entire Torah and all of the laws from God, and they were given to Moses on Mount Sinai. So we believe that the Torah was written, if you will, by Moses over 3,000 years ago, that it was dictated to him by God. Then the second section of the Hebrew Bible is called Nevi'im, and this literally translates into prophets. So these are the prophecies. So there's 21 books. Some of the names you may have heard of: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all these good old biblical names. Jonah, that's a big one. And I should mention too that the Christians also look to this as well. This also is part of their holy book of the Christian Bible. And then the third section, also part of the Jewish and Christian tradition, is called Ketuvim, the third section of the Bible, which means writings. And this is made up of 13 books. Some of the more popular ones you may have heard of is the book of Proverbs, the book of Ruth, the book of Lamentations, the book of Psalms. Now, the book of Psalms I want to highlight, though, because that has a very special place in the Jewish heart. It's 150 chapters. It's compiled by King David, who was probably our most famous and influential ancient Israelite king. He ruled around 1000 before the Common Era. And the term psalm derives from the Greek word psalmos, which means a song accompanied by a string instrument. Now, in Hebrew, the word is tehillim, that's the plural, or tehillah, which means literally songs of praise. So obviously there's a lot of praising of God in these songs. And the words have remained, but sadly, a lot of the music that originally went with these has been lost, but there are modern renditions that are very beautiful. And these Psalms are really a primary source for both Jewish and Christian worship. And they permeate our prayers. They're interwoven throughout our prayers, throughout our life cycle events. They're very beautiful. They're very poetic. And I think they're extremely relatable, because they really express a whole array of human emotion. If you read the Psalms, there's joy, there's pain, there's sadness, gratitude, despair, anger, a lot of anger in there too. Pleas for protection, for comfort, for vengeance, like really a whole gamut, the whole spectrum. So it's something that we turn to a lot, especially during times of distress. So I can say, like, personally, when I'm feeling very overwhelmed, very frightened, very lost, that's the first thing I want. I'm like, I need my book of Psalms. Where's my book of Tehillim? And I'll read probably the most famous Psalm. You guys have probably heard this. I'll just read to you so you can get a little taste. It's Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, if you will. That's kind of what it's known as colloquially. So it starts out with, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So that's Psalm 23. Now, in addition to the biblical books, we have something called the Mishnah, which is, we believe it was also given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai, yet it wasn't written down. So the Mishnah is the oral law, and it was passed down orally from fathers to sons, or from teachers to disciples. And this, approximately 1800 years ago, a rabbi assembled the scholars of the time to compile this into a book, to write down these oral laws. So that is the Mishnah. But then, in the centuries that followed, rabbis and scholars were poring over this tremendous collection of wisdom, and then they came up with a further commentary, which is called the Gemara. So the Mishnah and the Gemara make up what's called the Talmud. So we talk a lot about Talmudic wisdom, so that's what we're referring to. Okay, so we talked about the Bible, the Torah, Ketuvim, Nevi'im, Mishnah, Gemara, Talmud, our prayer book. Okay, that's called the Siddur. So that's arranged according to a Jewish calendar. And I think our Jewish calendar is very similar to the Hindu calendar. It's mostly lunar. And our prayers are offered for all the days of the week, including the Sabbath, which for us is Saturday. It means Shabbat, or seven, is the seventh day of the week, the Sabbath, and the new moon. We have prayers for the new moon, as well as our festivals and our fast days and our life cycle events, such as the biggie everyone's heard of in the Jewish world, the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, and also weddings and funerals. So that's all in the Siddur, or the Siddurim, it's plural. And let's see. Okay, there's one last piece of Jewish scripture I feel like I need to highlight, and that is called the Zohar. And that is a foundational text of Kabbalah. And I know I've referenced Kabbalah a couple times. I'm not very well versed in it. It is known as the most mystical aspect of Judaism, if you will. And the Zohar, it is said that only those who are extremely elevated spiritually should study it. So full disclosure, I've not even attempted it because I know I'm not there. I know I can't grasp it. I know it's extremely esoteric. And in fact, it was actually hidden by some rabbis for over 900 years because It was so powerful. And I could be wrong, but on an intuitive level, I suspect that those who can grasp it and can't understand it, I suspect that there's a lot of overlap and a commonality with the Siddhantas of Hindu philosophy. So maybe next year I'll be ready to get into that more. But that is kind of what I've prepared today in terms of Jewish scripture. I've covered the biggies. That was very much of an overview of a 101, but I definitely wanted to highlight some of this to all of you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Christiane. And, as you were talking, I was just I was feeling the connections between what I researched and what you're speaking about with the Torah and all the, associated, literature and scriptures that you spoke about that are all connected with it. There's so many parallels. It's unbelievable. So great to get this perspective from you. And thank you so much for all this research and wonderful information that you gave us about the Jewish holy texts.
Thank you. So are you gonna take it away now, Pat?
Yeah. So I'll be speaking first. So essentially, when we talk about Sanatan Dharma, as I said earlier, there's so many different scriptures that, if you were to ask the average Hindu, what is your holy book, right? And they would either say there are a whole bunch of them, or they would probably say the Bhagavad Gita, because that's the one that's most highlighted. Neither one is actually the correct answer, because even the Bhagavad Gita, for that matter, it is giving us the essence of the authoritative scripture. And that authoritative scripture is, or they are, the Vedas, the collection of hymns, essentially, is what they are. And our scriptures are actually broken into or divided into two different classifications. One is called Shruti, that which is heard, and then came the Smriti texts, which are basically transmitted through memory. They also were revealed by divine intervention to select sages. But when those sages were given the ability to be able to see past, present, and future, they were at that point able to write down the scripture that they were inspired to teach humanity. And that's why that written text is what was transferred from one guru to the next to the disciples. So it's a different situation where you have ancient scriptures and they're orally transmitted from generation to generation, and there's no manuscript for a very, very, very long time. And versus the Smriti texts, which are transferred or transmitted by memory, but were also written down right away. So that was the unique. That's why these two categories are distinctly different. So the Shruti scriptures, as I said, are the Vedas, and they're the top authority when it comes to all the scriptures that represent Sanatana Dharma, because essentially the Vedas came first and everything was inspired, or basically like a branch of that. Everything came from that. So the origin point is the Vedas, or are the Vedas. These Vedas are referred to as apaurusheya. That means they're not man-made. So it's not anything that anybody has sort of conceptualized themselves and written it down. The Veda itself, the word Veda itself means knowledge. So knowledge of what? Knowledge of really everything there is to know in creation, including how creation began, which we spoke about in another episode. But essentially, they're considered word of God. And they were imparted to some very select seers or saints, rishis, and they were revealed to those rishis, to those great seers, during their meditation. And essentially, whatever they had learned from that, they had memorized and orally transferred to their disciples. So, Christian, this really ties into what you were just saying, like the Vedas were very much orally transmitted from one guru to the collection of disciples, and those disciples essentially at some point became gurus themselves and continued that lineage. And literally, it's like almost daily recitation of these great hymns, and there are thousands of them in each book. And when I say each book, I'm saying that actually nearly 5,000 years ago, there was a great sage named Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna Dvaipayana, who later became known as Vedavyas, because he was the one who compiled all the Vedic hymns and essentially broke them up into 4 books. The first one is called the Rig Veda. That is the oldest. And then comes the Yajur Veda, and then Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. So it's in that order that these were compiled. So every Veda is categorized into 4 different sections. So the first one is where you have the hymns, right? The actual hymns themselves. And those hymns are in Sanskrit, and they are called the Samhitas. So each one of these 4 Vedas has the Samhita section, and then there's another section called the Brahmanas, which is basically, in the first section, the Samhitas, you actually learn how to recite these Sanskrit verses. But the Brahmanas is where you sort of understand how to apply it in your life. You sort of gain a better understanding rather than just memorizing what these Sanskrit verses are. And then you have the Aranyakas. So there were some individuals who wanted to contemplate in solitude, sort of, about these hymns. So they went into the forest. Aranya means forest. So those who went in the forest, because they felt like in city life or wherever they were living before, they didn't have that calmness and that quiet atmosphere in order to be able to really zone into what these hymns are talking about. So they really spent a lot of time later in their lives contemplating on that in solitude. And then once deep contemplation happens, you really allow it to soak into your system, into your psyche. And that's when the Upanishads come into play. So that last section. So we have, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads. But what it brings to light is the 4 Purusharthas that I spoke about in another episode, that are Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. Like the first 2, what I mentioned, Samhitas and the Brahmanas, that's for a part of our life where we are living our lives as per our duty, and it's called Karmakand. So we need the prayers and the rituals and all these things that we actually physically do or chant or pray daily, or the pujas that we do, the worships, those are what are part of the karmakand. So what we actually do as karma to propitiate deities and gain their blessings and grace so that we can prosper. The second part is called Jnanakand. So the Aranyakas and the Upanishads, the last two sections of each Veda, take us towards the final goal, which is moksha. So it emphasizes who we are truly, which is the Atman, and our relationship with the higher self, which is Paramatma or God, and how we need to go about getting on some of the prescribed paths to realize that in our lives. And the Upanishads are of great importance because they make up the higher philosophy that that particular scripture is trying to get humanity to understand. And the Rig Veda being the original one, it is divided up into 10 chapters, and there are roughly a little over 1,000 sacred hymns, and each one has thousands of verses. So imagine that, 1,000 hymns by themselves, and each hymn can consist of 1,000 verses. So I'm not going to really get into these numbers when we talk about each Veda, but if you really think about it, really each Veda is an ocean by itself. So there's so much in it that it's so hard it's mind-boggling to just think about where to start or how to comprehend all of this, where we are in time. It's very difficult for us in the Kali Yuga right now to be able to have the time or the ability to comprehend all this. That's the reason why we have the emphasis that a guru is important to be able to impart us this wisdom in a concise manner so that we can understand specifically based on our temperament how we can go about progressing spiritually in our lives. And these sacred hymns that we spoke about, they're grouped and they're called suktas. And these suktas are a collection of these hymns that are dedicated to a particular deity. So in the Rig Veda, there's a lot of glorification of deities, which, Christian, you spoke about that too. So there are so many different deities or demigods that the Rig Veda actually glorifies. Some of them are the natural elements that we spoke about that our bodies are made up of and that we have all around us in nature, like Agni. I believe the first Rig Veda mantra is actually dedicated to the fire god, Agni, because fire god is known to purify everything. So that's the reason why we believe that our bodies should be cremated, because bodies can become diseased or impure, and once it's put into fire, the fire burns it and purifies the matter, essentially. So, but the fire can never be polluted, whereas air and water, those things can be polluted. But fire cannot be polluted. That's the reason why fire god Agni Dev is propitiated first to purify us, to help purify. So we're praying to the fire god to purify our minds and our hearts and burn up negativity. Similarly, when we get married, Vikram, you know that we actually take the peras around the fire, the Havan Kund, where we have the fire. And that is ultimately to purify our intentions towards our spouse. And our spouse also takes the same vows. So we make these vows as we walk around the fire. So going further, we have Varuna, who is the demigod of water, Vayu, which is god of air or wind, Surya Dev, which we believe symbolically is Surya Dev is the sun god. And we believe that the sun, when the sun comes up, what happens? Our darkness is dispelled. So the light of knowledge is often compared with the sunlight that dispels the darkness of the night. So when the sun comes up, it's a new day. We start fresh. So similarly, we have the light of knowledge that dispels the evil and darkness within us. And Soma, which is a god of plants. And we have other hymns that glorify the holy rivers. And all of these are essential. They play an essential role for us in our daily lives. And we just take it for granted, but the Vedas tell us that all of these are here for to help us, our lives be sustained, and we also have to respect those elements of nature that help us survive, and we can also give back to those elements of nature as well by trying to keep our water systems clean and our air clean and our environmental efforts that we're making today. There's so much that we can tie into how the Rig Veda actually explains that we should understand and respect, how much those things are helping us. And we also should understand that those aspects have life as well. So the soul that we have is non-different from the soul of an animal or an insect or anything, or plants, trees. So really there's a unity amongst all of nature. So that's what the Rig Veda, although the hymns are recited with certain rhythmic patterns and meters and phonetics and pronunciation and all that stuff, there's so many mantras that I actually chanted in the beginning of our episode that we do every episode. Many of them come from one of these Vedas or another. And the way I chant them is actually not the correct way, because there's a certain way of doing it in a very rhythmic pattern and with certain tones and stuff like that you should be doing it. So there are people who actually study how to recite these hymns for years. And obviously who they're studying it from has to be an expert. So that's also of great importance, because sometimes if you do it at the wrong time of the day, or you utter these carelessly, sometimes it can invoke the opposite result of what you want. So this is of great importance for us to know. But at the same time, I think what we understand is that intentions also matter. As long as our mind and heart are pure and we have the good, right intentions and goodness and good vibes for everybody in society, then I think even if we recite them wrong, I believe it's still forgiven. So there are other collection of hymns or suktas that glorify more prominent gods and goddesses that we've come to know of, and like goddess Gayatri, who is considered actually the mother of the Vedas. So we often propitiate goddess Gayatri in order for our intellect to be able to absorb this great wisdom. And we request through the Gayatri mantra that, O Goddess Gayatri, may you sit within our heart and our mind and our intellect and actually help fill our heart with this great wisdom and for us to be able to learn from it. And so the Gayatri mantra is very popularly known. There are suktas for goddess Saraswati, who's the goddess of arts and education and music and dance. There's goddess Lakshmi, who's the goddess of wealth and prosperity. There's also Shri Sukta for goddess Lakshmi, actually. And Lord Vishnu's mention also comes. And there's a very famous collection of hymns called the Purusha Sukta, which is really recited first in the Rig Veda, but I believe it is repeated in all the four Vedas. And that's in glorification of Lord Vishnu. And one of the most famous lines is Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam. So that actually means that Lord Vishnu's abode, or the worship of Lord Vishnu to reach Lord Vishnu's abode of Vaikuntha, is the highest goal of any being. So that is the highest realm that anybody can reach. And we've mentioned that in the past. Another key mantra is Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. So Ekam Sat means truth is one, but the great seers, saints, they all recognize that one truth in different forms and by different names. So that's a very popular shloka or mantra that comes directly from the Rig Veda. And the Upanishads, there are many of them. Obviously, there are 108 total Upanishads spread out over the 4 different Veda books. So the Rig Veda actually contains 10 of them. And the notable ones are Aitareya Upanishad and Kaushitaki Upanishad. So those are the 2 that are most profound. And finally, the key teaching of the Rig Veda is respect, value, and pray for all species of life in nature surrounding us. Same goes for all species of life in realms above and below us to bring about the understanding of oneness among all beings. Then we move on to the second Veda, which is called the Yajur Veda. It speaks more prominently about the rituals. So the pujas and the fire sacrifices and the different rituals that we do for the good of humanity and for our own good as well. Those are essentially what the Yajur Veda concentrates on. A lot of the hymns do carry over from the Rig Veda, so they're repeated, but they're also grouped in a way where the priests who conduct these rituals on our behalf, they have been trained to recite these suktas in the form of worship and having the understanding of what are the different phases of each worship practice that we do. Like different pujas have different phases. So these priests are supposed to be well versed in that. So they understand exactly when to chant the holy hymns, and then to ask the people that are actually doing the puja what they have to do. So the priest essentially is conducting it and asking the householders or whoever's the actual one who's sponsoring the puja what they have to do, in order to, get the grace through that holy ritual. So why are these rituals done? Well, primarily, I think they're done so that we, as individuals or as families, we achieve whatever it is in life, in material life, that we wish to achieve, right? We have our needs, we have our desires, like the artha and kama portion, which is like, how do we go about making money? How do we fulfill our desires? We need the grace of the demigods and God himself, the Supreme Lord. So it's called Ishta Prapti. So whatever we desire, in order for that to come to fruition, we do the pujas. And of course, there's intentions matter, because I think when you have very selfish intentions and like, I have to have this happen for me, so I'm just going to do the puja for that very purpose. But it's like, it's very self-centered. And if that doesn't happen, then you lose faith and all that. That's not what this is all about. You have to have the utmost sincerity, the faith, and you're also okay if these things don't happen. But as long as they're within righteous boundaries, there's nothing wrong with asking for reasonable things to happen in your life. The other aspect is anishta parihara, which means warding off evil or evil forces that you may feel like are impacting your life, negativity, sickness, all these things that sort of are deterrents from us having a regular, happy, prosperous life. We want to get rid of those negative forces. So these are the two reasons why we primarily do the rituals. And the Yajur Veda actually is unique in the sense that it's actually divided into two major sections, or two different schools actually. So there's a Krishna Yajur Veda and there's a Shukla Yajur Veda. And there's a backstory behind this. How it actually came to be is Vedavyas, like I said, compiled these 4 different books, right? And he actually had one disciple that he sort of imparted each one to specifically. So there was one he he specifically taught the Rig Veda to, another one the Yajur Veda to, another one the Sama Veda to, and another one the Atharva Veda to. So the one that learned the Yajur Veda, he was invited to a Vedic conference, so to speak. And he had learned the Yajur Veda in great detail, and he was sort of having his own disciples at this point. And what happened was, he, for whatever reason, was unable to attend this conference that he had agreed to go to. And during that time period, ancient Vedic civilization, he felt that was a sin, because he said, I gave them my word, I was going to attend this, and unfortunately I wasn't able to attend it. So I committed a great sin. So I need to do penance and some sort of repentance in order to clear myself of this sin. So he had several disciples, and he actually asked his disciples for help, and he said, I want all of us to do this particular ritual, and I need all of you to do your part. And one of his disciples was very, very brilliant. Like, he had learned everything to perfection. So he said, why are you bothering to tell all of these other disciples to do this? I can do it myself. Just you and I can handle it, right? And at that time, especially, that was also a sinful way of thinking and saying, you're discrediting the others who are disciples, which is not correct, and you're showing your ego. You're supposed to be ego-free, but you're actually showing your ego that I'm the most brilliant disciple you have. So you don't need to bother with the others. Just let's you and I do this ritual. So when he said that, his guru said, actually, you know what? Because of you might be brilliant, but at the same time, the display of ego and arrogance that you just showed, that's not going to cut it. And I'm expecting you to basically leave back everything that you learned from me. So he said, you're not going to be able to, you have to promise that you're not going to use any of what you learned from me in your future life, and you're going to have to leave my school. So he basically then recited everything that he had learned from his guru, and he took the pledge that I'm not going to use any of this wisdom that I've learned from you. Then he went off and he went into the forest, and he decided that, hey, I'm still young. I have to do something with my life. So while I've taken this pledge and I will honor it, I'm going to still meditate on the light of knowledge, which is the sun god. So he did deep meditation on Surya Dev, the sun god, and the sun god actually appeared in front of him and said that you have earned my visit. So I can impart to you, because you have basically lost your ego at this point. I will impart to you the same wisdom in a different manner. So that what he had learned from his guru, he was taught that in a different, essentially the same wisdom, but slightly different in nature. Maybe there are some differences in the hymns that he was taught. And so the Krishna Yajur Veda is what he had learned from his guru originally. And the Shukla Yajur Veda is what he learned from the sun god. So these two schools within the Yajur Veda are, one is considered a little more scattered, which was what he learned from his guru in the beginning. And what the sun god had taught him was a refined version of it. So this is an interesting part of the Yajur Veda, which doesn't apply to any of the others. So I thought that really was interesting. One of the Yajur Veda mantras that belongs to the Krishna Yajur Veda is the Mahamrityunjaya mantra, which is the Lord Shiva's mantra, Om Trayambakam Yajamahe, that I chant every time. So that is for us to conquer to propitiate Lord Shiva, who is the conqueror of death, so that we may rise above our fear of death. There are peace-loving mantras, also coming from the Yajur Veda, which is a very popular Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryan Karavavahe, Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We're wishing peace for everybody. And then there's another famous one from the Shukla Yajur Veda, which was given by the sun god, and that is Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. And that means God, the truth, is full in himself, in and of himself. He's got the fullness. And that fullness resides within us as well. Until we realize it, we don't feel full, we feel incomplete. But once we realize that the divine within ourselves, we feel that fullness, and we see that unity within everybody and all of nature. And the Upanishad portion of the Yajur Veda, there are 51 Upanishads that are within the Yajur Veda, and they're broken up into these two schools as well. So put together, it's 51. And the notable ones are Taittiriya Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and Maitrayani Upanishad, Brahadaranyaka Upanishad, and the Isha Upanishad. Then we move on to the third book, which is called Samaveda. And the Samaveda is interesting because it's essentially 75 to 80% the hymns are from the original Veda, which is Rig Veda. And very few are original hymns. So it's really repeated Rig Vedic hymns. But the interesting thing about it is they are sung. So, Christiane, you mentioned this as well, that there are certain texts where they take the holy prayers and they are sung. They're in the form of music. So the Samaveda is what introduces music and meters and proper music theory. And it's really the origin of world music, if you think about it. The 7 notes, or the Sat Sur, what they call. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni. So those are the 7. And just like that in Western music, there's do, re, mi, fa, so, so there are 7 of them. So really, this is considered the origin of music history. It all emanates from the Samaveda. And there are proper ways of actually how these Vedic hymns are supposed to be sung. There are different scales by which you can sing them. Like we have lower pitch, medium pitch, high pitch, high scales. Then we have an interesting tie-in with the Bhagavad Gita, because where Lord Krishna is speaking about the essence of the Vedas in those 700 verses, there's a verse in chapter 10, verse 22. This is in during the chapter where he is actually talking about how he's the best among everything. Among the mountains, I am this. Among the warriors, I am this archer or this person. So he's saying that the best in every aspect of the world is what I represent. So he actually says, amongst the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. So he says, I am the Samaveda amongst the Vedas, and Indra amongst the celestial gods. Amongst the senses, I am the mind. Amongst the living beings, I am consciousness. So in this verse 22, that's where he says that. And I was wondering, the Rig Veda is obviously the oldest and the most authoritative among the 4. It sort of sets the stage, and a lot of the Rig Vedic hymns are repeated through the rest of the 3. So I was wondering, how come Lord Krishna actually said that he's the Samaveda? But I realized quickly that music is what touches everybody's heart. And if you really think about it, a beautiful instrumental piece, or somebody who's singing a really, really beautiful composition, they may be singing in a language that we don't understand, but yet that song may really touch our heart, and we may add that to our playlist and we say, hey, I want to listen to that again. I have no idea what the words mean, but it really touched me. So Lord Krishna is saying that even I, as God, love it when these hymns are sung in praise of me and my energies and my demigods. So the sweetness of music is brought to light here. The effectiveness of music, not just for humanity. It's actually said that all of nature, plants, animals, all are appreciative and can be moved by really good music. So Lord Krishna, I think, deliberately chose that because he also in his incarnation was a musical avatar. He loved to dance, he loved to play the flute, and so many animals would follow him and come behind him when he would play the flute. They were enchanted by that music. So it made a lot more sense when I did more research. And it's interesting that also sage Narada, who's considered the celestial musical prophet and sage, he has his own contributions to the Samaveda, where through his collection of teachings, they're called Shikshas. There's a book that is a sort of an ancillary text called the Naradiya Shiksha, where he provides guidance as to how these hymns should be sung and what is the manner in which they should be sung. And there are three other sages who also gave their own shikshas. There's Gautama, sage Lomasa, and Panini, who's a great grammarian, the ancient Sanskrit grammarian, also gave his commentary and his teachings about the Samaveda as well, because he was trying to get everybody to understand how these words should be pronounced. And sometimes they're pronounced a little differently when they're sung versus when they're recited. Certain words can be twisted a little bit, or certain words can be, certain parts of the word may be enunciated a little differently when they're sung versus recited. So some really amazing scholars have spent incredible amount of time studying tirelessly and dissecting each and every one of these hymns and being able to make sense of these hymns, taking away the complexity and really helping people understand what its essence is. The key teaching, I would say, is Sage Narada actually brings to light, is that music is pure and divine in its quality, which helps our prayers reach the divine while positively impacting the one who is singing, as well as those who are listening to these hymns. He also says that one can be only proficient in singing these hymns if they possess the following characteristics. They have to live a pure life. They have to have that intention that they want to purify their life. They have to have a disciplined life, strong faith in God, total dedication in studying from a guru, and following the Vedic principles in order to sing the praises of the divine with utmost sincerity. If this is done, it can take one to a transcendental state. And really, it helps them truly understand and acquire the expertise of musical presentation of these holy hymns. There are, in terms of Upanishads that come at the very end, as I mentioned, there are 16 Upanishads in the Samaved, and the two that are most prominent are the Chandogya Upanishad and the Kena Upanishad. Lastly, we come to the final Veda called the Atharva Veda. And the uniqueness of the Atharva Veda is that it actually, I would say, concentrates more on how one can prosper in the material world. Even though the Upanishads obviously do bring it back full circle towards spiritual progress and the ultimate goal of life, which is moksha, there's a lot more emphasis on your livelihood, rituals, and certain practices and prayers that are more centered around good health, cures through natural resources, like, it basically is like a precursor to Ayurveda, I would say, where we can find medicinal cures through using natural herbs and resources around us. And it delves into ancient surgical procedures, which were meant to preserve one's life and be able to move past major health ailments. It also emphasizes taking care of one's familial responsibilities and relationships and maintaining good ethics. It speaks about how one should go about earning a good living. Many hymns are there that are interestingly considered to be like magic spells that are meant to ward off evil spirits, and also wishing for long life for loved ones. There are hymns within the Atharva Veda for those who are looking for a life partner, people who don't have potentially good fortunes when it comes to their love life. So if they're seeking a life partner, then there are hymns for that. There are hymns that are related to those who are of the warrior class or kshatriyas, to be able to understand the art of righteous warfare and to defend one's country with utmost sincerity. There are hymns for peace as well. And interestingly, there are no aranyakas in this book. So unlike the other three, where they have that third section, which is called aranyakas, which means one who contemplates in the forest, so to speak, on these, there's no aranyaka section in the Atharva Veda. And the Upanishads, there are 31 of them. And the most notable ones are Mundaka, Mandukya, and Prashna Upanishads. And they largely speak about the Atman and its journey until it realizes the higher self, which is Brahman or Paramatma. And they expound on the primordial sound, Om. And then there are a couple of other concepts related to the Vedas that actually go into the Smriti texts, Smriti scriptures, that Vikram is going to speak more elaborately about many of them, but I'm just speaking about a few here because they're directly tied into the Vedas. And there are certain subsystems called Upavedas, and they are born out of the revelations of each of the four Vedas. And these Upavedas are related to a particular aspect of life that was considered of great importance during ancient Vedic times and continue to have some relevance today. So Yajur Veda, which is obviously the study of sustaining life through diet, health, natural remedies and medicines and herbal resources that we have, that emanates or that ties into the Rig Veda. There's Dhanur Veda, which is study of warfare and use of weapons and the ethical use of weapons and the right use of weapons when the time is right. That emanates from the Yajur Veda, or it's linked to that. Then there's Gandharva Veda, which is the Veda of or study of aesthetics, music, and dance, which emanates from the Sama Veda. And Arthashastra, which means the study of pursuit of wealth and prosperity, emanates from the very last one, the Atharva Veda. So similarly, there's another group of ancillary texts called the Vedangas. And the angas means limbs or branches. So these ancillary texts are something that focus on the various aspects of how the Vedic hymns should be recited and studied for deeper understanding and connection. So these Vedangas are Shiksha, which is study of phonetics. Proper phonetics is required in order for you to recite or sing any of these hymns. There's Kalpa, which is study of practices and proper application of these chants and rituals. There's Vyakaranam, which is the study of the grammatical rules that surround these hymns. There's Niruktam, which is a study of etymology of the Sanskrit words themselves. Right? Chanda, which is a study of poetic meter. So how these should be recited should be rhythmic and poetic. And then there's Jyotisham, which we know today as Jyotish Vidya, and it's the study of light, particularly the light from the celestial objects, which is roughly correlated with modern-day astrology. So with that, I come to the conclusion of the Shruti texts. I hand it over to Vikram to speak about the Smriti texts.
Thanks so much, Pratt. I mean, really, this is a topic that I didn't know much about. So it was great to hear from you about it and dive in a little deeper. And I'm sure our listeners will find it very insightful to understand this a bit more. Yeah, you touched upon Smriti, which is the other facet of this. And these are texts that kind of bring a practical application element to the Shruti side of things and make them, in what I believe, an even more digestible way to be able to implement in your lives. So, when we break it down a little bit, there are a few different types. Pratt mentioned the Vedangas and Upavedas, but there's the Dharmashastras as well. What are the Dharmashastras? These are the texts that focus on dharma, and they outline the legal and social rules one would need to follow. Then there's the Puranas, which are the narratives that have, a legendary feel to them. They are stories that provide teachings to everyone and provide everybody a sense of what is the right moral path that one should follow. Then you have the Itihasas, which are the epic history stories of Hinduism. And namely, this refers to the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And then you have the Agamas. And what are the Agamas? The Agamas are essentially, they refer to specific types of traditional philosophies and stories. And I'll dive into a little bit more what those examples are. And then the other piece is known as the Darshanas. And the Darshanas are basically referred to as, the ritualistic act of seeing a deity, and also refers to a philosophical system of thought. And I'll dive into this a little bit more, but I was just kind of level setting what are the different things. So going back a little bit. So Dharmashastra. So Dharmashastras essentially provide the guidelines for the ethical conduct, the social order, and legal frameworks one follows within Hinduism. So this covers many facets of the lives that Hindus lead. So what is one's duty? What is one's right? How does one interact within the societal frameworks in which they live, keeping in mind the foundation of Hinduism, right? Now, dharma, which we've mentioned many times before, is essentially referring to our sense of morality, our sense of duty, and even, the ethics that we follow, the social order that we're following, and even within this, when we talk about dharma, there's different types of aspects that we implement at different stages of our life. So there are essentially 4 stages here. There's the brahmacharya phase, which is the phase of when we're students, when we're unmarried, when we're younger. There's that phase. There's a set of responsibilities that come there. Then there's the grihast phase, which is when we become householders and are running our lives with our families. There's the vanaprastha phase, which is the retirement phase. And then there's the sannyas phase, that phase of life when we are ready to renounce all material attachments and things. So essentially what the Dharmashastra does is it serves as a foundational source for understanding all these components and how one needs to move forward with that, right? Going to the other piece, which is the Puranas. Now the Puranas are, they're essentially, they're best known for the stories that they show with regard to Hindu gods. There's two types of Puranas. There's the Mahapuranas, which are the major Puranas, the ones that have a very widespread popularity, have widespread messaging, widespread acceptance, widespread love. And there's Uppuranas, which are maybe lesser known, but not less in terms of importance, but just as not as well known as the Mahapuranas. And then essentially, what the Puranas cover at a macro level, aside from these stories. So I mentioned they cover the creation, they cover the destruction, they cover the relationships between gods, the establishment of societies. So, like in every faith, there is, somebody who had set the foundation and base for the beginning of civilization. And for Hindus, that was Manu. So the Puranas touch upon that as well. And then when we talk about the interplay between some of our epics have, generally showcased two types of dynasties that were established on Earth. So that is the lunar dynasty and the solar dynasty. So the Ramayana focuses very much on the solar dynasty. The Mahabharata focuses on the lunar dynasty. So, just to give a list of some of the Puranas, which you might be familiar with, there are essentially, I believe, 18 Mahapurans, like the great Purans, which I wanted to mention in particular. So there's the Brahma Puran, which is the first Puran. The Padma Puran, which is about stories about Goddess Lakshmi and Sri Vishnu. The Vishnu Puran, which is dedicated to Lord Vishnu, showing his various incarnations and stories. There's also the Shiv Puran, which covers all of these stories, legends related to Lord Shiva and his powers. And then there's the Bhagavad Puran, which is a personal favorite of mine, and probably considered to be the most popular, which focuses on the life and teachings of Lord Krishna. There's the Narad Puran, which focuses very much on religious teachings, philosophy, and very dharma-focused. There's the Markandeya Puran, which is focused on goddess Durga and her powers, and most prominently with her role as Mahishasur Mardini, the killer of the demon Mahishasur, which I'm sure many have seen visual representations of her in this Shakti role. So this Puran covers that. Agni Puran, that is a very comprehensive text covering various aspects of Hindu philosophy, also covers key rituals, ethical practices, knowledge. There's one particular one which I learned about, which I'm curious to see how this one works. But there's something called the Bhavishya Puran, which predicts future events and prophecies related to the end of the universe as we know it. So I know to some that might sound like something you don't want to touch, but I'm definitely intrigued by that one. Brahma Vaivat Puran, which is a story of Lord Brahma and the creation of the universe. Ling Puran, that's dedicated to Lord Shiva in his Ling form. Vara Puran. So this is really interesting because this is a Puran that's focused primarily on one avatar of Lord Vishnu, which is the Vara avatar, which we spoke about in a previous episode, the boar avatar. Now, if you think about it, Ramayana, and you think about Lord Krishna, these are avatars that have a very long story with lots of nuances, lots of characters. But the Vara avatar is it's a more simple story. So it's interesting that there's a whole Puran dedicated to that. Skand Puran is there, lots of different stories and legends on various deities. Vaman Puran, another avatar-based one. This is the small person avatar that Lord Vishnu takes, Lord Vaman, who, without getting too much into the weeds of it, but Lord Vaman came and he essentially came to stop the takeover of the universe by King Bali. And he essentially took all his wealth and everything that he had, but he also provided him with salvation. So King Bali was the grandson of Prahlad, who we talked about in the Narsimha avatar. Kurm Puran, we've spoken briefly about that as well in the past. The turtle avatar, Lord Vishnu. Matsya Puran, we also spoke about that. The fish avatar, Lord Vishnu, and this one took place during the end or destruction of the universe and the establishment of the new Manu as well. Garur Puran, this is dedicated to the mount of Lord Vishnu, which is Garur. And Brahman Puran, which is focused on the creation of the universe and its various aspects. Epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, I'm sure we could do an entire episode on those. We did an episode on Sri Ram, but both of those in brief, showcase different aspects of how one should lead life. In the Ramayana, it's focused very much on an ideal human. What is an ideal husband, an ideal son, an ideal brother, and how one can stick to their dharma and overcome challenges and triumph over insurmountable challenges. That's essentially the essence of the Ramayana. The Mahabharata, which is a lot more complex, shows more so the world as it is, a world which is filled with gray, people driven by their own motivations, and how would one need to navigate through immorality, through evil, in ways that may not be linear. So sometimes you have to bend certain strict ideals to achieve a more ideal outcome. So if you're fighting a greater evil, but you need to cheat a little bit to defeat that evil, that's one of the aspects of the Mahabharata. And I know we'll talk about that in a lot of details probably in a future episode. But Mahabharata also has the Gita in it, which, of course, is the foundation, one of the foundational texts in Hinduism, and basically the truth as it comes out on what everything is. So essentially, these two historical epics are a key part of Smriti and have been brought down. Ramayana was written by Valmiki and then adapted in other languages. Valmiki wrote in Sanskrit. Tulsidas and other saints did it in Hindi and other regional languages in India. Mahabharata was written by Vedvyas. Interestingly, both Valmiki and Vedvyas were themselves characters in these epics. So they're extremely reliable in the sense that the people who wrote them were a part of the fabric as well. So the next piece is the Agamas. Now, a little bit about this. The Agamas are most popular with those who follow Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Shaktism. So Shaivism is essentially one is a believer, one worships the ideals of Lord Shiva. So Shaiva Agamas focuses on Lord Shiva and the traditions with that. And Vaishnava Agamas, these focus on Vaishnava practices or those associated with Lord Vishnu. And the Shakta Agamas, which is also known as Tatra, focus on Ma Shakti. And these are associated with her and her stories and her practices, rituals. And when we dive down to kind of what type of philosophies and content are in there, the Agamas focus very much on spiritual life. So how does the universe exist? How is it created? How does one grow spiritually? How does one meditate? How does one do yoga? How does one recite the proper mantras when applicable? How does one do the rituals? How does one construct a house of worship? How does one do puja on a daily basis? And how does one inaugurate the systems that run temples? This is all there in the Agamas. And this one particular thing I'd also mention is Agamas are not easy to understand. They are actually very difficult from what my research shows to find, difficult to understand, and are pretty much only available to those who have a qualified guru that is an expert in this. So for many of us, it may not be something that is easily accessible or easily something that we can understand. So in the broader sense, those are the Agamas. I'll touch upon the Darshanas, and I know we'll be talking about this more and more. But darshan, what does darshan mean? Darshana means sight or view. Darshan, right? And this focuses very much on if you see a deity, what are the rituals associated with that? Also, what is a philosophy beyond that? So you look at a murti, the image of the god in the mandir. What do? How do you pursue a path of spiritual enlightenment when you behold such things, when you seek to connect to the divine with that? That is a tenet of here. And there's also 6 pieces within darshan. So there's the nyaya piece, which is the logic. There's the vaisheshika, which is focused on naturalism, right? There's the sankhya, which is the dualistic nature, right? One faces, right? Yoga, which is the meditation and spiritual practice. The mimamsa, the rituals and scriptures, and then the Vedanta, which Pratt mentioned, the Upanishads and the ultimate reality. So the purpose of understanding this particular tenet is to push people to find self-realization, understand what is real, understand the soul, the jivatma, the jagat, the world around them, and the absolute, the Brahm. So this, in a nutshell, is Smriti. I've only scratched the surface here, but I hope that it has whetted people's appetite to try and dig in a little more and discover more about this.
Wow. Thank you so much, Vikram, for going over that, giving us that overview of all the Smriti categorical texts. And they're, this is really mind-boggling stuff, guys, because there's so many different texts and subtexts and, so many different categories. It could really be confusing and mind-boggling for anybody who's doesn't quite understand the order in which all of these came and how they've been classified by the great scholars and commentators. And really, we owe so much to these great scholars who were able to spend their lifetimes studying these things and lightening really the load for us a little bit. I can't say that even what they wrote down or their commentaries are easy for us to understand, but that's where, we have so many great modern day saints who have been able to make even simpler understanding of it for us. And we're so fortunate to have, the ability to really see people who can dissect and decipher and make sense out of these things and give us analogies to be able to relate to them. It's unbelievable. But this is just an introduction for all of you. And Vikram had touched on a couple of things here. I touched on the Upanishads, which is essentially called Vedanta, or the end of the Vedas, which is the philosophy aspect. And also he spoke about the Darshanas. So these are going to be two topics that we're going to have our next two episodes on. I'm giving everybody a preview here, where we're going to have a very esteemed guest who is very well learned and well versed in terms of his understanding of world religions and his understanding of all these different sub-schools of thought and philosophies, and being able to differentiate between all of them and really give us a great understanding of all of them. And we're going to have that special guest with us, Dr. Balaji Hebbar, who I've worked with nearly 2 decades ago when I was part of the Hindu Student Council group in UMBC. He still, I called him after 20 years, and I'm really glad that I was able to connect with him. He was happy to connect with me. He remembered me, and he's very enthusiastic and eager to be part of our show for the next 2 episodes, where he's going to talk about the Darshanas first, and then we're going to talk more in depth about Vedanta and the different schools of philosophy within Vedanta. So we really look forward to bringing you those episodes. And Vikram, a couple of things that came to my mind when you were mentioning the different phases of one's life. The what you call the bachelorhood, which is brahmacharya, grahastha-ashrama, which is the householdership aspect. Then one decides that, okay, it's time for me, my children are settled now, it's time for me to decide to start progressing on the spiritual path and trying to detach myself. That's the vanaprastha, as you mentioned. The other part, the last part, is sannyasa, if I'm not wrong. So that is when you're completely trying to detach from everything, as you mentioned. It's interesting that I did not tie that in, but sections of each Veda that I had mentioned, the Samhitas, relate to brahmacharya. So when you're young, you're taught all these concepts, and you just want to memorize those concepts, right? You may not be able to practically apply them in your life until later, but when you're young, you go to school and you learn all these different concepts and you try to memorize them all. You make sense out of them later in life, which is when you're older and you have your family and you find practical ways to apply it in your job and all that. So that's where you come to the grihastha ashrama, and that relates to the brahmanas, the brahmana section. Then the aranyakas relates to vanaprastha, where you're actually deciding that you want to go off into seclusion and contemplate more with concentration on these teachings and try to soak them in, right? And then the very last one is when you're detaching and you're making a conscious effort to detach from all the worldly affairs and worldly desires and attachments that you have, and that's called sannyasa. That phase is sannyasa, and this is the Upanishads. So it's interesting how these sections of within each Veda relate to the different phases of human life.
It's about these stages. I never really thought much about it until this episode, to be honest. Somewhere I had it in the back of my mind. But I think it's if one were to really look at each of these stages and think about what the scriptures say, how one should conduct themselves during these different phases of life, I feel like it would make life a little bit easier. Because oftentimes we are in these different stages, we get nervous, we get worried, we're trying to figure out what are we doing, what should we be doing, is this happening, is this happening, is this happening? But I think the scriptures are there to really prevent us from losing ourselves during these phases of life. And this is most important, particularly as we get into the the retirement stage and the renunciation stage, where some of us start feeling, what is the next phase of our purpose? What are things that we should really be doing now that I guess some of our material activities have started to taper off? So I think that the fact that this guidance is there within the scriptures, I think is something that I'm glad we could highlight. And I encourage everyone, and I'm pushing myself also, to have a deeper look at this and try to imbibe it, so that we are able to continue to lead lives of more inner peace, and less stress, and striving to do what's right.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these things can actually start working. We can start working on it earlier in our lives. It doesn't have to be that at a certain point, okay, now I think I'm ready to, there's no physically really going off to the forest anymore, like it used to be in the ancient times, where people would actually leave their kingdoms and live very simplistic lives, live in a hermitage or a hut or something like that. We may not do all those things, but I think it's really a state of mind, and how we can detach from things from within is what's more important than actually detaching and saying, hey, I'm physically moving, I'm wearing simple rags, and I'm living in a hut versus a big house. That's all like physical stuff. It really is not going to help you progress spiritually if you just do that. I think it's important to contemplate on the teachings, and I think in the Kali Yuga, it's probably even more important that we start imbibing and start reading and start trying to incorporate these teachings into our lives at a younger age, so that we actually get a better understanding or a little bit of a head start. I don't even know if you can call it a head start. I think the earlier you have this faith, this formidable faith in a higher power, and understand that you're something beyond this body, the earlier you can get that solid, firm, conviction, the better it is. Because I think that's only going to help you deal with your problems better. And if you can deal with problems better at a younger age, what's to beat that, honestly?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a question, guys. Okay. So we're talking like at least 5,000 years of scripture and tradition here, right?
Older than that.
Even older.
I'll say the reason why I say that. The Vedas are the word of God that was revealed to sages at the beginning of creation. It was revealed to Brahma, and Brahma basically distributed it as the creator to those he found to be worthy of it. So essentially, the Vedas are as ancient as God. So you can never say, if you believe God, there was never a time when God didn't exist. There was never a time when this Vedic wisdom did not exist. Of course, there was no use of it if there was no creation. But when creation takes place and the universe is started, the Vedas are born or reborn or reintroduced.
So someone could start learning this from the minute they're out of the womb and study nothing but this their entire lives and just basically begin to scratch the surface. So what can someone who's just new to this coming into this, like where do you even begin? Is this where you need a guru to even point you in the right direction? And if so, how do you find a guru?
Well, that's a $1 million question, right? Finding such a master is very difficult, and it's something that has to be karmically designed for it to happen for you, right? Somewhere in your destiny, there may lie a guru. So yeah, we can just do our own research, and I would say a great place to start, because the Vedas are so complex, what really brings to average humans level, to some extent, I can't even say it's that simplified, but the Puranas that Vikram spoke about, I think really bring, through the interaction of characters and these stories, where God has taken incarnation in different forms. This is really bringing to light how to live by this wisdom. So it's highlighting this wisdom that comes from the Vedas, and it's really showing how one can live by that. And those examples that are showed by these characters is something that we can get inspired by and learn from. So it's really bringing the Vedas to life. Just understand what these characters lived like, what was their character like. Then if you go back to the Vedas, you can say, hey, this hymn is talking about how one should fulfill all their requirements for there to be an ideal relative, a father or a brother or whatever, right? You see that in the Ramayana. Rama, who's the incarnation of Vishnu, is personifying all of those things at an ideal level. Of course, nobody's perfect today, but I'm just saying we have some ideals by which we can be inspired to be better people. And another thing is, we spoke about the Bhagavad Gita. Right? It's the book that everybody feels like they have at home, and they may not have ever read it, right? But it's the sar, or the essence, the essence of the Vedas and the Upanishads, or the philosophical portion of the Vedas, is what is emphasized in that 700-verse conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, right before the war is about to begin between the two clans. And that great wisdom of life, which is the most important takeaways from the Vedas that you can arguably say, is what Lord Krishna imparted to Arjuna in that conversation. So 700 verses is much easier to read than thousands of hymns that each have thousands of verses within them. Now, even that wisdom is hard, but we've had scholars and saints who have transliterated it and given their purports and so many different ways for people to be able to understand it today. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
No, it does. It does. And I actually read the Bhagavad Gita first in college at Boston University. It was part of my core curriculum. So for 1 year, we had to take this foundational core curriculum, and Bhagavad Gita was one of the required readings because it is so foundational. But you need to go back and read it again, obviously.
And Vikram, I actually had a interesting point that I'd like to discuss here as well about the Puranas. You mentioned the 18 Puranas that are big in terms of their vastness, how much great knowledge they have, and how much they're popularized and everything. And of course, Vedavyas composed all of them, and he was also the compiler of the 4 Vedas. Which really, it's interesting, that tie-in, because the Vedas are the authoritative scriptures, and then you have the Puranas, which some of it could be mythology, some of it could be history, and all those things. He wrote the great epic Mahabharata, and he had actually the partnership with Lord Ganesha, who helped him write the Mahabharata. But the interesting thing that I've realized through these Puranas, which can really confuse a lot of people, is each Purana is dedicated to a particular deity like Shiva or Lord Vishnu or Krishna or Durga or some form of goddess, right? And that confuses everyone because every Purana talks about creation, sustenance, and dissolution, or dissolving of the creation. And they attribute or give the credit of all of this happening to that one deity. And in every one of these Puranas, they say, one Purana says Goddess Durga is the source of everything. All the gods, goddesses, and all the creation comes from Goddess Durga. Similarly, Vishnu Purana or Bhagavatam will give the Vaishnava deities more importance. The Shaiva ones will give the Shiva more importance. This can really be confusing because you're like, which one is the real one? And the same great sage composed all of these, right? So it's quite perplexing and confusing when you think about it from that angle. And you're like, which one of these is really the truth, right? And then you start comparing the deities and you start wondering which one is more supreme. So it's a legitimate question, right? What I've actually realized, and this ties into our cosmic creation and time episode, that just like we have a reboot, and that each day of Brahma brings about new creation, new manifestation of life again. In each manvantar or kalp, there could be a difference in who the supreme deity is. And that's what helped me, because I heard this from a great saint of this time named Premanand Babaji. And he was explaining, can you actually falsify any of these or say one is true and the other one's false? If the same person wrote it to be truth, then it all must be true somehow. And the way to understand it is in different time periods when life manifests over again, God can take a different form as the supreme reality, as the supreme most deity, whether that be Vishnu or Shiva or goddess Durga or any other form. And basically everything will come out of that deity. Creation, sustenance, preservation, and dissolution. Everything happens by the will of that deity. And that's how you can make sense out of it, because otherwise you would be completely confused if you were to read all these Puranas, and then you would be wanting to know who's the supreme among all of them. Because all of them are reproduced in each Puran. You know, even if it's a Vishnu Puran, there'll be mentions of Lord Shiva. There'll be mentions of goddess Durga, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is an interesting perspective and didn't cross my mind, but yeah, absolutely. Just continues to show the multifaceted nature of these texts and even the things that are occurring as a product of them and around them.
Yeah. And, you know, another interesting tidbit is, which I think is very, very, very significant, is that Maharishi Vedavyas was no ordinary being. Vedavyas is considered an avatar of Lord Vishnu himself, because they say who other than God can actually understand God, and who can compile and compose all these great texts. It's humanly impossible. So they actually attribute his power to be able to do this to the fact that he's actually an empowered incarnation.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was another interesting nugget here. So at this point, we're going to go through the holy days of the month of June. And on June 3rd, we had Dhumavati Jayanti. And I didn't know anything about this until I saw my Panchang. And the significance is Dhumavati is a goddess, and it's her appearance day. She's a seventh aspect of a goddess, lineage of goddesses called Mahavidyas. And she's a fierce form of Shakti or power who embodies wisdom and detachment. And this day is observed with reflective practices, prayers, and rituals encouraging devotees to contemplate the transient nature of life and strength that comes from solitude. The devotees who practice this, they cultivate inner strength and resilience, seeking guidance from the goddess in their quest for spiritual enlightenment. Then we have, on June 4th, Mahesha Navami. It's a sacred Hindu festival with profound significance, primarily dedicated to the worship of Lord Shiva, or Mahesh is another name, and goddess Parvati. It is particularly important for the Maheshwari community, which is actually in modern-day Rajasthan. That's where they come from. It's particularly important for that community who believe it marks the day of their spiritual rebirth and lineage. The festival also commemorates the divine union of Shiva and Shakti, Shiva and his wife and his female companion Parvati, and it is believed to be the day Lord Shiva first appeared to his devotees in the form of Mahesh. Then we have Ganga Dashera, which is, it holds a high significance and spiritual meaning for Hindus, primarily celebrating the descent of goddess Ganga to the earth. This event is known as Ganga Avataran, is believed to have occurred on this day, marking the birth anniversary of the goddess, the holy river Ganga. Devotees honor this occasion with prayers, holy dips in the river, and other rituals, seeking purification and spiritual liberation. On the same day, we had World Environment Day. And it's interesting how it ties into what our scriptures teach us about the environment and how we should care for it and respect it and value it. It's observed on June 5th. Is a global platform to raise awareness and encourage action on environmental issues. It serves as a catalyst for global discussions, policy changes, and individual action towards environmental protection and sustainable development. On June 6th, we have Gayatri Jayanti. I mentioned her mantra which is a very popular mantra in Hinduism, Gayatri mantra, the goddess of the Vedas, the mother of the Vedas. Her name is Goddess Gayatri. She's the universal mother, or Vishwamata. It is a sacred day to honor the goddess, seek wisdom, and connect with Vedic knowledge. Devotees chant the Gayatri mantra, perform meditation, and reflect on the spiritual light she represents. On June 7th, we had Eid, which is one of two Eids that are celebrated by the Muslims. It's called Eid al-Adha, or the Festival of Sacrifice, is a major Islamic holiday that commemorates the Prophet Abraham, his willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael, or Isaac, in obedience to God's command. It is celebrated on the 10th day of the Islamic month of Dhul Hijjah and marks the end of the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. The story of Ibrahim's sacrifice serves as a powerful example of obedience, faith, and trust in divine wisdom. Then on June 11th, we have Kabir Das Jayanti. Kabir was actually a Muslim prophet who had strong belief in Hindu faith. So Kabir is a highly significant figure in Indian history, particularly within the Bhakti movement or the devotional movement, and for his profound influence on spirituality, social justice, and interfaith harmony. He is revered for his poetry and teachings, which emphasized direct communion with the divine, challenged religious hypocrisy, and advocated for the rights of marginalized communities. He was also a great follower and disciple of Lord Rama. Then on Saturday, June 21st, we have International Yoga Day. Recognizing its universal appeal on December 11, 2014, the United Nations proclaimed June 21st as the International Day of Yoga. The International Day of Yoga aims to raise awareness worldwide of the many benefits of practicing yoga. Now, yoga, of course, has many meanings, but in this particular context, yoga means the Hatha Yoga, or the physical exercising and breathing techniques for good physical health and proper rhythmic breathing. And, on June 15th, I actually skipped over this, my apologies. But on June 15th, we celebrate Father's Day. And I'd like to wish from the team Divine Discoveries, everyone who is able to celebrate this with their fathers or is a father themselves, happy Father's Day to all of you. And June 27th is Al-Hijra, which is another Muslim holiday. It marks the migration of Prophet Muhammad and his followers from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE. It's a pivotal event in Islamic history, marking the beginning of the Islamic era and the Muslim community. It signifies a spiritual and communal transformation, as well as the birth of a new society based on justice and equality. The Hijra also serves as a reminder of the importance of faith, perseverance, and the pursuit of a better life, both physically and spiritually. So to all those who celebrate the Eid festival, the festival of Al-Hijra, I wish everybody the best. And with that, we come to the end of the holy days of June. Christiane, did you have any to speak of?
Yeah, two thoughts. First one is the first Eid that you referenced that the Muslims celebrate, and acknowledging Abraham's sacrifice of his son and his faith. That's actually in the Torah. So, and Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. So you can see how Islam emanates from this tradition, as does Christianity. So it's very beautiful that we can trace our lineage back to Abraham, or Ibrahim, as the Muslims would say. And then we did have a Jewish holiday. It was June 1st to June 3rd, and it's called Shavuot or Shavuos. It's a 2-day holiday, and this coincides with the date that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people at Sinai more than 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
And we celebrate, probably the hallmark of this holiday is it's auspicious and traditional to stay up all night learning Torah. And then in the morning, you have like a sunrise ceremony, or a sunrise festival, if you will, where you're like reading the Torah. It's very beautiful, and it's customary to wear white, and it's floral, and it's in the summer, late spring, early summer. And it's also a good holiday for dairy lovers because you feast on dairy foods. And so that was just celebrated a few weeks ago in June.
Wonderful, wonderful. June 1st, you said?
Yeah, June 1st through 3rd.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's a 2-day holiday.
It hasn't even been a whole week, but yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad you could, bring that to light as well. So we're going to have, as we always do, Guruji's Gyan, or the wisdom coming from the Guru.
Salutations to Sri Krishna Bhagavan, which is the cover story you have of Krishna sitting as the charioteer of the battle of life. Our ego, ourselves in the plane of ego, represent that Arjuna. What is the name? So we are all confused Arjunas. Krishna, our great self. Is there anyone among you who is not confused? See, no one dare. So, therefore we are confused Arjunas. Krishna, the great universal spirit, 8th incarnation of Mahavishnu. He is the Purana avatar. Avatara, God descending on earth for the ascent of man. Avatara, a great being coming down to our level to speak to us, teach us in our level, and still something very high, so that we have something to imitate and something to practice to reach that level. That's called an avatara. In that, all of us are amsha. We are all avataras, but we are all amsha. A-M-S-H-A. Amsha means the part manifestation. We are all drops from the ocean of bliss. Our nature is eternal bliss. Eternal happiness is our true nature. We have all come from there. And we don't understand why we are miserable when we are bliss in our true nature. So I want you to find an answer yourself, that when the immortal God, whose part we are, and that full God is also manifest in every one of us. When an immortal principle is manifest in every one of us, is the truth. Why are we miserable? That is all you have to ask always the question, and find the answer yourself. I can just give you a parable so that you remember. Philosophy sometimes we forget, because philosophy is like as we always say, the blind man searching for a black cat in a dark room when there was no cat. Therefore, parable will help you. A man in the dream lost his head. That is the parable. A man in his dream lost his head, and he is crying that he has lost his head. Just tell me, how can he cry without head? That's all you have to find out. He is miserably crying in the dream that he has lost his head. But I don't understand how he can cry without head. His head is not there. And he is worried about that all the time. Who can help him? Unless someone reads his mind and reads his dream, he will be miserable until he cries with agony or something and gets up himself by the noise which he made. Then he finds everything is okay. Then what will he do? He would no more cry now. He will burst into laughter himself. He is laughing at his own folly. I had my head all the time, but in dream I don't know how I cried without my head. But I was miserable all the time until I was awakened. That is all the answer is. An all-pervading, omniscient, immortal, all-knowing, blissful peace that passeth all understanding is hidden in everything and in everybody and in every being, always without taking a weekend vacation. All the time that alone is present. And how we can constantly worry that I am a mortal, Mr. This, Mrs. This, with such and such postbox and such telephone number, identifying all the time with these things and getting miserable. I don't know why we are miserable. All that we know is we have forgotten our true self. But just now I reminded you, could you be happy? That also you cannot guarantee. You would say, I don't know, I will try. That is the position of Arjuna as well. All of us know that it is truth. Our spirit is immortal bliss. Is it not? Anyone among you have doubt about that? That the truth within you is immortal bliss. Do you have any doubt about it? If you have doubt about it, I cannot help you. God himself cannot help you. You are helpless and hopeless. By the grace of God, you don't have that doubt. Therefore, I am safe. My work is simpler now. You have that. You have that faith that an immortal truth is hiding in you. And we also know that having that immortal truth within us, we are most of the time miserable. Why? We don't know. Therefore, we want to know. That is all about your coming, driving in this traffic all the way here, I think. Because I thought all those cars are coming for our lecture. Mother Beena was telling me the whole world should have come here. For the other day, on the first day, mother was telling, which is so true. So I was just joking, telling our Srini, look, all this traffic, yes, they are all coming to our lecture. Which means they are all coming for the happiness. They are all driving, thinking that somewhere, they don't know where it is. It doesn't know in 2650 Fulton it is. But they are all definitely, they are driving in search of happiness. They somehow miss the address. And therefore, they go here, there, and spend a lot of money only to go back again with indigestion or some form of trouble, some form of attachment, some form of pain. What I am trying to say is Bhagavad Gita has an answer to this age-old question, an immortal truth hiding in a mortal weft. An all-pervading truth, as if he is located in a thumb-sized flame in the Sacred Heart, which we call our soul. And in that is everything. It is Brahma, it is Vishnu, it is Shiva, it is Rudra, it is Christ, it is Jehovah. All the name you can say to that kingdom of heaven.
Okay, so with that, Christiane, this kind of brings full circle the answer to your question as to where a newcomer can start. I think I wanted to end with Guruji talking about the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes, and so relatably as well, because I love how he started with we are all confused Arjunas.
Yes.
Because that's how I felt earlier. So that really spoke to me.
Absolutely. And what did Arjuna do throughout the Bhagavad Gita? He questioned Krishna about everything. He's like, why should I actually fight this war? That was his whole. He's wanted to escape the duty of fighting the war. That's the whole, and Krishna is giving him all the profound wisdom of the Vedas, and through in his own way, and trying to make him understand that running away is not in your best interest. It may seem like it's the right thing to do, but you're thinking out of ignorance right now. So we all are in ignorance, but it's good when we start contemplating, have thought-provoking inquiries in our mind about the higher purposes of life. And we try to chase those ideas using the Holy Scriptures, because the answers lie there, At least they guide us towards the answer, which we ultimately find it within ourselves at some point. That's what we call self-realization or God realization. It means the same thing. When we realize our true nature, our true self, we automatically are freed from all our bondages.
Very nice. Amen to that.
Yes. So thank you, Christiane. And
thank you.
Vikram unfortunately had to drop off, but on behalf of Vikram as well, I'd like to thank all our listeners. I hope we didn't, confuse anybody more. I hope some of this was more clarified and made simpler for everybody to understand. And if any of you have any questions that arise in your mind about what we said, please do email us at divinediscoveries108@gmail.com. And we would love to entertain those questions like we have in a past episode as well. So thank you, Christiane, for joining me and providing the great insight on the Torah. That was wonderful. And thank you to all our listeners. We wish you all good health, be well, and wish you all good peace and happiness. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.